Let me introduce one of the many superior women that you will be meeting today. Daphne Maxwell Reid, where are you, Daphne? There you, oh, thank you, Daphne. Come on up here while I introduce you so you can luxuriate in all of these positive things. You already know her because, of course, she's had starring roles in numerous popular television programs. Luckily for us here in Virginia, she left the bright lights of Hollywood and New York to settle back in Virginia. In 1997, Daphne and her husband Tim founded a movie production facility in Petersburg. The studio is Virginia's first full-service film studio that does work in film, television, music videos, and commercials. She's also a generous philanthropist, devoting significant time and resources to promoting education and the arts, and on public radio narrating Art on the Air. Please welcome the moderator of our first panel, who will in turn introduce each of her distinguished panelists, our good friend, Daphne Maxwell Reid. Thank you so much, Daphne. We appreciate it. Nice to see you.
Good morning, and thank you, Larry, for preaching to the choir. I was given a note just a few minutes ago, since Larry brought up that the state is named after a woman. Check out the state seal. There are 4 goddesses on that. So, women rule. We tell that to our girls. Let's share it some more. I'm very happy to be here again today, and this is going to be a delightful session. I've got some friends gonna come up and talk to you, and some people that I'm going to meet today that I didn't know their story, so it'll be a delve into the interesting for me also. And first on our panel, I see in the background, during her 40-year career, Eva Teague Hardy has worked in both government and business spheres, and she successfully understands the influence between business and government. The relationship between the two is something that I know anybody in business understands. For nearly 2 decades, she worked in state and local government, serving as the commissioner of the Virginia Department of Labor and Industry for Governor Charles Robb, as well as Secretary of Health and Human Resources under Governor Beliles. She then moved to the private sphere, working as an executive vice president of public policy and corporate communications for Dominion Virginia Power, where she shaped Dominion's corporate identity and brand reputation. Most recently, Miss Eva, as I call her, worked as the interim state director for Senator Mark Warner, in addition to serving on several boards. Please welcome Eva Teague Hardy. And now a new friend that I'm going to make today. Born in Amelia County, Virginia on May 6th, 1926, and we celebrate the wisdom. Ms. Scott graduated from Longwood University and received her Bachelor's of Science degree from the Medical College of Virginia School of Pharmacy. She worked many years in her family business and co-published the News Journal newspaper for more than 8 years. She served in the House of Delegates as an independent for 4 terms, from 1972 to 1979, representing the 31st District. Ms. Scott made history in 1980 as the first woman elected to the Senate of Virginia. As a Republican state senator, she represented the 17th District through 1983. Please welcome Eva Scott. Now, is Mary Sue Terry here yet? Oh, I'll wait to introduce her. How about Judy? Judy's here. There she is. Judy. Oh, she's probably trying to find a place to park. Yep. Judy Peachy Watson is a longtime Republican political operative in the state of Virginia. In 1978, she worked as John Warner's campaign manager in his race for U.S. Senate, a position she held for 30 years. Additionally, during the 70s, Judy Watson was a high-ranking member of the Republican Party of Virginia and acted as a mentor to Karl Rove as he began his political career. In recent years, Judy Watson assisted the Bob McDonnell gubernatorial campaign through the group Virginians for McDonnell, working to gain support from independent voters and Democrats. She also has received credit for her work in helping Democrat Mark Warner win independent voters in his run for governor. Welcome, Judy. Good to see you again. Now, I'm going to introduce Mary Sue, even though she's not here yet, so she can come in and we'll have all her information. She was born in Martinsville and received her undergraduate degree from West Hampton College, as well as a master's degree and law degree from the University of Virginia. Now, prior to representing the counties of Henry, Patrick, and Pittsylvania, does that mean she moved a lot? No. Okay. And the city of Martinsville in the Virginia's House of Delegates as a Democrat from 1978 to 85, Mary Sue Terry worked as an assistant Commonwealth's attorney in Patrick County while practicing law privately. In 1985, Mary Sue Terry became the first woman elected to statewide office in Virginia and became the second woman to serve as Now, okay, we'll get to that. She's the second woman to serve as state attorney general in the United States. In the United States. The second. All righty. Mary Sue Terry won re-election to continue to serve as attorney general, though she lost the 1993 governor's race to George Allen. Mary Sue Terry currently maintains a law practice and consults for Microsoft Corporation. So you've got all that when she gets here. Now, I want to start with a very, very basic question. And I'm going to start with you, Miss Eva, Miss Scott. That Eva. Two Evas. So, Miss Scott, what was the biggest challenge of being the first when you were? Running, just deciding to run, the process of getting elected, and sitting in that chair.
Well, you know, I served 4 years in the 4 terms in the House, and during that period of time, I was redistricted twice, and I moved twice during my political career. So I had a lot of challenges. So the reason that, if we're talking about the Senate, I was finally given, my district was going to be really majority Democrat. So I decided to move back into the county that I was born in and had my business and everything. And so I decided to run for the Senate. So of course it was a large district, but it was a good district, and part of it, of course, I had served in the House.
Did you find it hard to find financing?
Well, I partially financed my own campaign, and but I got a lot of contributions. But in those days, it didn't take so much money to run.
Right.
You advertised in the newspapers. In the more rural district, you had lots of weekly newspapers, and you also had radio stations in most of them. So I did ads. I did, and of course, I'd always done reports back to every newspaper, and there were about 12 in my House district. So I had done those reports. I had done I called in my reports to the radio stations, and of course I explained the important issues that we'd had that week, how I had voted, and why I had voted. And so I had pretty good name ID when I ran for the Senate, but it was a hard-fought campaign, of course, and I won by 424 votes, I believe it was. So you know it was a hard campaign. So
once you got there and sat in the seat among all your fellow senators who happened to be fellas.
Well, you know, it never bothered me. We were so busy, And of course, I burned from within to run. I would never move twice and been redistricted 3 times. And so I was interested in working with everybody. I even still worked with the House members some. So the fact that I was a woman, I didn't think about that really. I was just me with the things that I was interested in and the things that I was dedicated to and committed to. It's what you think and how you respond to your constituents and how you vote for them. That's what matters. It's not whether you're a woman or a man.
We understand that's what matters. But how were you received by, did you find dialogue among the other senators who were men? Was it different than they had dialogue among themselves? Was it different with you?
I don't know that it did because we worked on the same issues. And I worked, when I was in the Senate now, it's true, different from in the House. 40% of the people at that time had polled that 40% were independents. So as an independent at that time, because that's the only way I could run, in my first race, it had to be done in 6 weeks because of the redistricting that took place. It's a long story. So I had worked with the senators before when I was in the House, because if I saw a bill that would passed and I thought it had concerns in it, I would go over to our conservative senators and let them know about it. So I had worked with them, and we had a lot of good Democrat conservatives that we worked with. It wasn't that you were just party. You worked we worked with people, both parties, and as I said, I was just one more person in the Senate as far as I was concerned. And I think that's the way you have to treat it. You can't, But I think women do have a passion. I think that women have more a passion within. They burn inside, I think, when they run and go through, because we do have to make sacrifices when we run, because we're family and we have children and we're responsible for a home, besides maybe the work that we do. So we do. I think most women burn with some particular things that they're interested in accomplishing that they think would be good for families and their county, their city, their town, their country. And so I think they go with a special perception.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to welcome Mary Sue Terry. Thank you for joining us. And you heard that last comment about burning with the desire to run. Was that the case with you when you ran?
No.
Why did you run for office?
Well, my story goes back to 1973 when I graduated from law school and went back to Patrick County, a county at the time of roughly 18,000 people, which has 18,000 people today. And by the way, Patrick County and Fairfax County had the same population 250 years ago. That's the true story. And there were 6 lawyers in the county, and I was the only woman. And I graduated from a law school that folks didn't have much respect for, which was the University of Virginia. And, but in any event, I was there 4 years as an assistant prosecutor, making $4,800 a year, and developing my own civil practice on the side. When a vacancy occurred in the House of Delegates, we were in a multi-member district with A.L. Philpott and Claude Swanson. The district was roughly then about 160,000 people. My county was in the far western part with only 18,000 people. And I was sitting in my office one day preparing to be appointed, I thought, to the position of Commonwealth's attorney, because the Commonwealth's attorney whose office joined mine was going to run for the House of Delegates. He was being heavily recruited by AL and others. And he called me in his office one afternoon when I was studying to be Commonwealth's attorney. And he said, "Mary Sue, I've decided I'm not running for Commonwealth's, for the House of Delegates. But I don't want to do it and run up and down the road just so one day I can put it on my tombstone." And he said, "I think you have a shot at it if you, and I'd be willing to try to do some blocking for you." And, you know, I was 29. It was the first time in my life I'd ever had time and money at the same time. And I was comfortable. I just moved in a house. I was in a meaningful relationship. And I said, "I'd really rather not. How about coming back? Maybe I'd like maybe to be considered in 2 to 4 years." And he said, "Our county's small. Judgeships are dependent on good representation. Reapportionment's coming up, and we're looking for somebody to make a 10-year commitment." And I sat there, and I knew I wouldn't be able to live with myself if I were either lazy, comfortable, or afraid. And I knew it was the type of thing that I felt like I could make a difference. And right there, within the period of 10 minutes, I mean, right after I went through that mental exercise, I said yes. And that was in February before the election in November. And I went home I went to my parents' home and told them, and my mother was instantly concerned about me. And I mean, families are always concerned that you'll get hurt. And then I felt led to go up to Kreitz, which is nothing but a crossroads, which is where the post office is that I get my mail. And it's got a few houses and a school, and an old bank that closed down during the Depression. And I started at one end of Kreitz, and I knocked on Miss Tatum's door. And she was up in her probably close to 80. I said, "Miss Tatum, I've decided to run for the House of Delegates." And she just looked at me. And then I went on down the street, and everybody just looked at me. It wasn't
Well, the women's movement had just gotten underway in the 70s.
So in any event, it was the toughest race next to the governor's race I've ever had. It turned out to be 6 of us running for 3 slots, 2 from Henry County, 2 from Pittsylvania County. It was a terrible campaign, and as it turned out, I won, and I happened to lead the ticket, which was not a very good idea when your running mate was Speaker of the House. And in any event, I came to Richmond, and I hadn't been to Richmond for a month before I heard rumors that I was running for Attorney General, which I viewed as absurd and embarrassing. And I was able sometime later to track those rumors down to a conversation being held in the tobacco company led by Jane Vitre from Fairfax, who died a few years ago. And that was the beginning. It was sometime later, Jerry Beliles even came down to my house in Patrick County, which is where he's always from, to ask me if I was running for Attorney General. And I said, "No, Jerry, I'm supporting you." And then 4 years later, I had a major crossroads, and I was fortunate to have some meaningful support. And Eva, you know what that is, and many of you in this room who helped me. And then I ran for Attorney General.
Not the burning desire that Eva was talking about.
Oh, I had a burning desire. But let me say this. Let me say this. I always operated spiritually. You know, I never felt that just because I felt led to run meant I was going to win. In fact, the night before my first election, a minister friend had said, "Why don't you sit down and write that's before the days of direct mail and polling or anything. That was when the Democratic Party could not pay its phone bill. I mean, this is 1970, 76 and 77. And so the night before the election, I was sitting down in my bed next to the phone, waiting to see if I'd get a Voters League endorsement, which would be critical to the election. And I made a long list of all the advantages of losing. I still have that list. The phone rang, and Velma Martin, bless her soul, Velma Martin was on the line and said, "You just got the Martinsville-Henry County Voters League." And when all the votes were counted, I led the ticket, and I got less white votes than anybody on the ticket. My race was won because every Voters League in the entire district supported me. I will always remember that and be grateful for it.
These stories are wonderful, wonderful little gems that we can build on in the present for reasons to stay involved in politics and not have it running amok, as it seems to be. Ms. Hardy, you never ran for office.
She didn't need to. She kind of told everybody else what to do.
Yes, I understand that you were very influential. You're on very influential in all of the things that you were involved with. What got you started in that?
Well, I think there are some people that are born to run for office, and then there are other people that either shouldn't run for office or should, really recognize what they're not good at and what they are good at. And I always recognized that I was very good at supporting other people who were running for office, that's what I love doing more than being the front person myself. I've taken the Myers-Briggs test many, many times, and I am, and some of you will have a hard time believing it, extremely introverted. I like to, recharge myself. I don't need to be recharged by external, folks or issues or things like that. But having said that, I love politics, and I'm as political as anybody, and I'm a fighter, and I like to get into fights and win. And so it has been a great joy to me to be able to, work for people both in the private and public sectors who are doing great things and who have challenges ahead, and work with them to kind of overcome them. Judy Wasson and I, for example, we were number twos, basically, and our candidates were running against each other in 1982 for the U.S. Senate. And it was a brutal campaign, and we lost by only 35,000 votes statewide, which is nothing really. But it was a loss nevertheless, and it was a tough, tough campaign. But Judy and I have been friends since '82 and have stayed friends in spite of that experience, because we knew that we were doing what we loved doing, and it wasn't personal. It wasn't, that we didn't like each other or that, I hated Paul Tribble. In fact, Paul Tribble, her candidate, and I have remained good friends. So the question is, I think, do you need to find what it is that makes you happy and productive and successful, and not to be led by what other people think you should be doing. I've been asked to run for office, I can't tell you, probably 1,000 times, and I have turned it down each time, including running for lieutenant governor, running for anything. And it's just not me. So you have to understand who you are and what you love, and do it as well as you can. I was there when Eva Scott, I was working for Lieutenant Governor Richard Davis when Eva Scott came to the Senate. And she's exactly right about the way it was. She wasn't treated like a separate person over here, a woman. She got right in there, and she fought for her causes, which were education and, sort of the small business world, because 71%, as she reminded me of, the legislature at that time were all lawyers. And she was actually the first businesswoman that ran and won in the General Assembly. And she came because she was passionate about issues. Mary Sue was passionate about issues. I think women run not because they think it's a job. They run to change something, and they run because they're passionate about an issue, and they want to see some outcome that's positive about what they believe in. So I do it my way, from behind the scenes, helping somebody and trying to influence the person I'm working for to go in the right direction, so to speak. And I'm lucky that I've worked for people almost 100% who have not been so inflexible that they didn't, listen or maybe take my advice and change their positions on some things and some major things. So, it's been a very interesting experience for me, and I've been very blessed to have two wonderful careers, one in the public sector and a second one that I never thought I would have at the age of 45, starting new in the private sector.
We'll get to that in just a few minutes. Judy, tell me how you got involved politically, since I see I didn't read anything about a law degree on your part.
Did I get it turned on? Back in 1961, a friend called me, and she said, Judy, I need your help. And I said, what do you want me to do? She said, I need you to help me. She said, my OB/GYN doctor is running for Congress, and we need help. And I mean, how do you turn down an appeal like that? And I said, how is he running? And she said, well, he's going to run as a Republican. And I thought, that fits right in with my belief that Virginia needs choices in general elections. It had been so long since the Democrat primary was not the general election. And I thought, we really do. We need strong two-party competition. So I got out and I worked my little heart out for Lewis Williams. And we didn't win. I was devastated. I went into a severe decline. But then Barry Goldwater came along in 2 years, in '64, and Dick Obenshain. And I became a complete and total political junkie. It was so much fun organizing, getting people involved, going door to door, talking about candidates and what they believed in and why they were going to be so great for Virginia and America. And I found out at that time that I lived in Chesterfield County, that you could have a Republican County Committee meeting in a telephone booth, and if you said, oh, I want to do so and so, and they say, oh gosh, good, go do it. And so we started building a party and getting people involved. And at that time, women were so important to that party, and because they needed the numbers. And so we got leadership positions. And then 1969 came along, and golly gee whiz, we won a governor's race statewide, Linwood Holton. And he took office, and we continued to build the party. I came out of the Fighting Ninth, and which is Southwest Virginia. I grew up out there. And even back when there wasn't a Republican Party at this end of the state, we were fighting Democrats out there. And so I just truly believed that good government comes from strong competition, and because you get the best running for office and you get the best serving. And so I worked my way. I became a Republican Women's Club president. I became a county committee chairman. I became a state central committee officer. I became Republican National Committee woman from Virginia. And through that process, I learned a lot. I learned a lot about campaigns. I learned a lot about raising money. And I learned a lot about getting people engaged. We started winning more and more races. In '72, we won a state Senate race with Bill Scott. Then we elected Mills Godwin governor, and I worked in that campaign. And then we elected John Dalton. And then we came to the Senate race in 1978. And I was running Dick Obenshain's campaign. And Dick was killed in a plane crash in August, right before the election. And we nominated John Warner. And so with John Warner, he asked me to stay and run his campaign. And it was tough. It really was, because we had really fought hard in the convention for the nomination. But I did, and John won. And gosh, that felt good. Managing a winning campaign, it just felt so good. And so I stayed with John and ran his state offices for a while, and was very, very big Reagan supporter, and was invited to take a job at the White House. So I went to work for Ronald Reagan as a special assistant for intergovernmental affairs. And my special work was with state legislatures. But Reagan had made a campaign promise that he would work with governors to eliminate sex discrimination in state laws. I got to do that.
Oh, yeah.
That was fun. And then I was talked into coming home and running Paul Tribble's Senate campaign. So at that time, I think, I was told anyway, that I probably was the only woman that had run 2 successful state Senate, United States Senate races. And Paul, then I stayed on with Paul and ran his state offices. See, I just got so addicted in all of this, I couldn't get away from it. And then when Paul decided not to run again, I got out of politics and went into the nonprofit arena and started raising money for good causes. When you introduced me, I said I should have been arrested doing all that stuff, but it was fun, and it was a great thing. And Eva's right. When there are people that are meant to run for public office, and then there are those of us who are meant to get them elected, and there's a role for every woman, whether it's helping elect officials, working for them once they get elected, or running for office yourself. And part of the fun in building the Republican Party was that we got so many young people involved, not only women in women's clubs and in county committees, but we were so aggressive at building Republican clubs on college campuses. And I look back as to who the presidents and leaders were in those college Republicans. So many of them are elected officials today. So it really is good, building a party and working for candidates.
Thank you. I'm going to throw a general question out and hop on it. The media is a little different now than it was in the 70s. As you say, it was local papers and local radio stations, and you could get your message out for a small fee. She got great music. Right now, everybody's getting the message out. She's jamming.
I meant to turn it off when I got too many things going on. Excuse me.
Right now, the media has to fill 24/7 with noise. It's noise. How do you think the influence of the media is now that it wasn't when you guys ran or when you guys worked politics back in the 70s and 80s? Tell me how you see the difference in the role of the media right now. Who wants to start? Okay, go ahead.
Sorry.
Our journalist.
I'm sorry. I didn't push hard enough.
Oh, but you have.
So you asked.
Yes, you were in journalism. You ran a newspaper,
Yes.
published a newspaper.
Yes.
How has journalism changed, the media changed, how it affects elections then and now?
Well, if you're talking about, district and Virginia elections, of course it's changed some because you use technology so much in campaigns. You campaign with all the new technology. But it's still urgent that people write letters to the editor. If you're running a campaign, now, you get people in that each political subdivision that are well respected, known, and you get them to write letters for you and talk about the issues. Today, of course, it's easier because the economy is what's ruined us all. I mean, we're all concerned about what's happening in the economy. So you really got some issues that you can run on today. And if you understand business, and it's so important that, and women do because we run households, and so we know generally, but we also have to really understand, and we should be educating our young to realize that it's the business and the profits and the jobs that are made from business that also pays the taxes to provide the services that we want to have provided. And so often, I think our young people have been taught that profits are a bad thing. But without profits, government can't operate because there can be no taxes, there can be no jobs, and because that's what's hurting us so today. But we can still do a job. People are influenced by what their neighbors write and think. And so it's still important to do that kind of campaigning as well as spots on the radios and talk about the reason you're running. And
did you find that back then you could speak to an issue rather than having to defend a point of view, which many people have to spend most of their time doing now, is defending a point of view that somebody disagrees with, and you get more of a reactionary than an action type of campaign?
Well, I had such a good district and running for both the House and the Senate that I think I spoke the language of the district and the people in the district.
And the district, you believe that that'll happen now in this milieu?
I think so.
Okay,
I
good.
think so. I think you make your points, and if you're strong and you take those stands and you give your reasons, but we've got problems in our country today that we've got to solve, and government's not the answer. It's the people themselves determining what kind of people we want to elect. And they must be able to add and subtract. Congress is not able to add and subtract.
Basic skills, yes.
So they
Yes.
need to understand where the money's coming from.
Excellent. Mary?
Do you think, Eva, that if there were 6 women sitting up there with the president in the White House, we'd do a better job of adding and subtracting?
I think so. I think I've had more experience.
Yeah.
That's right.
And
in
you know,
business or not, but it's great to also have that real understanding of what makes the economy right.
yeah, those of you who heard NPR this morning heard an analysis by some psychologists of underlying assumptions that folks might bring to the table in negotiating sessions. And 2 observations were made. First, if there were more women at the table, whether it's in a conference committee or whether it's sitting around the White House, there would be a different, more collaborative form of decision making. And the second was that, and this follows, and this may be the basis of it, is that men tend to be more aggressive and more competitive. And we've seen an awful lot of that. So let me just say that not only do I think we need more women in office to reflect the predominant values that most women have, but equally important is we need more women in office to have a transformative effect on our process and the way we come together to make decisions. Now, let me answer your question.
Yes.
When I was having my first statewide race, the custom was that a press corps began to follow the candidates for governor from Labor Day forward, and there would be a half a dozen or a dozen members of the press that would follow them. And what that meant was that you couldn't say one thing in one part of the state and another thing in another part of the state and really get away with it. And if you all recall the Oliver North race against Chuck Robb, it was a comment that he made in a classroom in front of the National Press Corps that was following him that brought down his campaign. If there had not been a National Press Corps in the room, because the Virginia folks didn't have the resources, he could very well have been elected United States Senator. But let me go back to my first race for Attorney General, and this, in my judgment, is fundamental to how things are different today. There was an allegation, there was an allegation in an ad run by my opponent, who's a really nice fella. We went to college together. That I was not a member of the Virginia Bar Association, which was at the time is a statewide voluntary bar association, which has a history of discrimination. And you know, I just didn't need to join it. But the implication was I wasn't a lawyer. And I had many of you calling me, Mary Sue, they're saying you're not a lawyer. And there was a second ad, because in my first debate against a surrogate opponent of my, surrogate for my opponent, he said, Buster O'Brien has more trial experience and in one finger than her opponent does in her 5 ringless fingers. And then it followed that I had only tried 2 jury trials in my entire career, which was absolutely false. But the way the press would cover it today would be he said, she said. She said she did more than 2. He said that she did 2 or less. Okay, it's the he said, she said. What happened back in that day, which was a total surprise, was the Richmond Times Dispatch or the News Leader sent a reporter to the courthouse in Patrick County. Would that ever happen today?
No.
And they researched the records, and they came out with the story that the allegation against me was false. Now, we went from the press corps following everybody and a candidate jumping out of a car, running in and trying to get on a landline to check up things, to fax machines, and then we went to cell phones. And by the time that I ran for governor, not a soul followed me in the press corps on my rounds around the state until the last week. And on the last week, 2 women were with me, and we were in the ladies' room up in Harrisonburg at the airport. And they said, you know, it's really different. You know, male reporters would be in the restroom with male candidates. There's something about that, you know, that environment. And they said, this is different. Today, because of the market pressures on newspapers as a result of the growth of the internet and 24-hour television, reporters stay more at their desks, especially in races here in Virginia. They rely on bottom-feeding blogs and legitimate blogs and whatever comes over the wire. And so they sit there with their telecommunications feed and they cover a candidate. They never see how the candidate relates to people. They never know what a candidate is saying in various parts of the state. It's coverage from 30,000 feet. You could just as well be in a satellite, have a reporter in the satellite circling the earth, and a reporter on earth would not have any more, as a general rule, awareness of what's on the ground than somebody in the Challenger.
What do we do about that? Yes.
That's the reason that you need letters to the editors from people known and respected in your district to write for you and lay out the issues and what you stand for. And
now, does that mean that we need to also be in the publishing business so those letters get printed?
Well, that's true, but weeklies will carry most letters.
Okay.
That's the advantage of being in rural areas. Now, I realize it's different in cities than in rural areas.
What do we do with an entire population that has gone away from weeklies that are going out of business to the internet? and trying to figure out on the internet what is truth and what is not truth.
That's true. You got to do a variety of the internet and find some conservative
gotta
as well as
find some papers.
You have so many that are more liberal probably than conservative, and you've got to search for some balance.
Yeah, that's going to be a great challenge,
Right.
especially since they can tweet at the polls now. So, Judy, do you have any comments on that?
The whole dynamic of campaigns now, it's so different from what it was when I was running them. Our big challenge was getting enough money to buy newspaper ads, radio spots, and put on a few TV spots. And now, when you stop and think what goes on, how many of you have gotten calls from presidential candidate campaigns in the last 3 months? They're already calling. Everything is so 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. And it's, as you just referred to, you don't know what's true and what isn't true. And so voters now are going to have to be so much more astute and so much more dedicated to finding the truth and knowing what a candidate really stands for. And that's one of the reasons political campaigns are costing so much more. So it's not going to get better, and that's the sad part. And I think voters are getting totally overwhelmed and worn out with all of this. And so how do you keep voters engaged? How do you get them to the polls? These are all questions that parties are going to have to think seriously about as to how do they do this. And young people, how do you capture the 20-somethings and the 30-somethings who are working so hard to pay off their college loans that are they really going to get focused in this? And as we sit in this room, one of the things that I feel that we need to do is become more engaged with young people. This year, Ann and Nancy, we were working on bipartisan redistricting. We really wanted to see this happen. And one of the things that we did was we worked with Christopher Newport University, Quentin Kidd, and we got Quentin to spearhead through the Policy Center there a statewide competition. And we had 13 universities, 16 teams, all drawing maps on redistricting. Now, all of these students know what it's all about now. And they are going to be our leaders in the future. And so as you talk to your grandchildren and your children, talk to them about becoming engaged. Talk to them about being involved on their school campuses, in projects that relate to government. And don't think that it won't make a difference. Had we not started that competition on college campuses, my guess is none of those young people would have even thought about redistricting and how it impacts candidates in government. So, think about it. Think about how you can get more involved in issues like that, because the issues of bipartisan redistricting, of paying your way, understanding how to add and subtract and state budgets, these are all things that impact our lives. So go home and make a list. List 5 people you can talk to that can talk to young people and get them engaged and interested in politics.
I have a question for Eva Teague Hardy. In the business side, when you're doing the government relations with the businesses, what are they saying now or in recent years is their duty through the media to political parties? Is it to further their specific agendas, or are they more society-based in their interest in getting someone elected?
I think that the support from various businesses for particular candidates is a combination of two. First of all, I think, at least I always looked at it as a long-term kind of relationship rather than as a particular bill or, and supported people who voted against, some of the things that we held near and dear to our hearts because they were good legislators overall. They looked at the big picture rather than specifically one piece of it. So I think it's very important that in the business community that there is more of that kind of long range look at somebody's total package rather than specifically how they relate to you. I think that doesn't do anything really positive. And so that's what I tried to do. But I also think on the media side and the way elections go today, it was the four of us dealt in an era where politics was very personal. You called people, I remember Governor Belial spending Christmas Day and New Year's Day calling 1,000 people around the state and checking in with them. How is this going? How is that going? You don't have that anymore. You don't go and campaign on a personal level. In rural communities, I think some of that is still there, but in the urban communities, suburban communities, it's much more difficult to kind of touch the flesh, as they used to say. And so people have no media. There's no media anymore, frankly. There's just a series of technologies out there. That's the media today, a series of technologies that you can use, and you have to use them all, to get your message out. And there's so many messages going out that you've got to really clamor to get your message out, whether you're in business or on the political side, in the public sector, or an advocacy group, a nonprofit. It's all the same. I think that you've got to use every possible means to educate people, make them understand what the issues are, and use all the technologies that are available. I will just give you an example, and I hope I'm not stepping on the Richmond Times-Dispatch's toes, but if I am, so be it. Recently, a 50-year reporter, Tyler Whitley, who's covered every political campaign, national and Virginia, was laid off. 50 years. There's no one now, really, who's going to be covering national conventions or campaigns. And, and the majority leader of the United States House is from Richmond. And we have nobody covering the Congress except through media reports and other kinds of. I think that shows you that, kind of where the mind of the media is. It's certainly not on reporting or even loyalty of employees. It is on how are we going to make the most money with the fewest people. And so as candidates or as political junkies or whatever we are, we cannot depend on newspapers the way we used to get messages out and to do the research that Judy and Mary Sue talked about.
One thing that if you aren't familiar with it, I would really encourage you to sign up for it, and that is the VPAP Whipple Report. It is outstanding for finding out what's going on all over Virginia, not only in the newspapers, but in the blogs for the newspapers. It's the Virginia Public Access Project Whipple Report. And you can go to Google, put it in, it'll bring it up, or you can subscribe through VPAP, and they'll send it directly to you as an email. And it's a wonderful.
Whipple, W-H-I-P-P-L-E.
Whipple Report. Mm-hmm.
And it's VPAP.
It's VPAP, V-P-A-P, VPAP. And that gives you just a summary of everything that's going on in newspapers, editorials, political articles, and their blogs, their websites. So it's easy access, and that is one advantage of internet.
Excellent. There are a few advantages if you know where to look. But there's so much noise on the internet as well as on the air that we have to define how we explain to our children how to think. They don't quite teach that in school anymore. They teach you to answer questions on a test. And I have been encouraging young people when I get to speak to them, and I speak mostly to high school and college kids, that the ability to think, to reason, and to seek out the truth is the most basic part of their education. So how do we get that throughout our Commonwealth? Let's start there. How do we affect politically, because you guys are political junkies, politically, the education system that we have in Virginia here so that politics will benefit from a thinking public? It's on.
Okay. For one thing, we need to start requiring that our students take Economics 101. And we're not doing it, and they're not understanding. And we mentioned taxes a while ago, but it's the regulations that legislators and congressmen are placing on business and the way we live that's really hurting as much as the taxes that are involved. And the agencies are beginning to raise their own money through not helping businesses to improve whatever the problem might be, but they fine them and then let them worry about it. And that's why businesses are not expanding and why many people are not even getting the hours in business out there across the country that they were. So everything's declining, but government is growing. And the benefits in government, those working for the government, are increasing. And that's why we've got the economic problem and the budget deficit that we've got. And we've got to have people representing us that understand you can't keep making laws to regulate business if it's not reasonable. But if we don't understand business and how business works, we're not going to solve this problem, because we depend on business for every dollar that the government spends.
How can we encourage?
We don't have the business, and we're running it overseas, and that's why that we have got the deficit, and we're borrowing 40% of the money that we're paying out now for services from somewhere else, and we're so this is one of the things we need to run on.
How do we find these candidates? They can't all be lawyers.
We've got, as you say, we've got to start educating with Economics 101, how it works, how business works. We've been teaching many other things, but we haven't been teaching that.
Judy?
Some schools require it, some of the private schools require it, and it's not happening in our colleges either.
Nope. Judy?
Well, I think there's some good things going on at universities. Universities are moving towards more and more leadership schools and special scholarships for leadership. Then you're getting public policy centers on college campuses where young people get involved. So I think our educational institutions are moving out into more away from textbooks and more into real life situations with these types of departments within the universities. And so I think there's hope. Wherever you have a strong leadership program, and they do at the University of Virginia, they have it at the University of Richmond, CNU, Mary Washington, encourage young people to get involved in the leadership programs in their universities and schools. I personally think that leadership needs to start in high schools. I would love to see K through 12 start working towards putting a leadership program, required leadership program in our high schools. I think that then will start to spark interest. I think that anytime you can talk about policies for government, for education, for that, again, people sparks interest. And so I think we just need to push harder and support these particular parts of higher education and push it for high schools. Because if we don't tweak their interest, they're not necessarily going to get that involved. Eva, you coming out of one of the most dedicated leadership positions can address this better than I can.
Well, I think you're exactly right about the universities, Judy, and the kind of courses that need to be taught even earlier than university, because a lot of people don't go to college, they go to community college, or they take technical classes, so it's got to start even in middle school. We used to have a leadership program we sponsored at Dominion that would go into the middle schools and work with students and the public school system administration to talk about what it takes to be a leader in today's world. And it was a really good program, and we did it in some of our cities in Virginia, and you know, after a while became difficult to schedule because the school systems, you know, don't like for the kids to come out of school in the middle of the day or for a whole day, and with the SOLs it became even more difficult. So it stopped, but leadership training is just imperative. But I also think that we have to look at the media again, coming back to that, because I think there is a different way they look at women than men, and I think we need to be educating the media as well about the way they look at. I go back to Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign and the constant discussion on some of the cable networks about what she was wearing. Had she worn it before? You know, she gained weight. What was she doing with her hair? And on and on. I think it goes back to something someone once said, is that when a man speaks, people listen and then look. And when a woman speaks or is in the forefront, they look first. If they like what they see, then they listen. And if they don't like what they see, they just turn it off. So I think there's a lot of education to be done, both at, you know, starting early on in schools, even middle school or lower, but also we have to educate the media about what really are the issues. Is it about somebody's looks or the way they speak, or is it really, you know, someone called Michelle Bachmann a flake the other day. That's totally insulting, whatever you think about her political views. I felt very insulted that she was called that by a commentator on TV, because I think that's, again, indicative of the different way the standards that men are rated and for political purposes and women are looked at for political purposes.
And they did the same thing with Sarah Palin about the clothes, remember?
Yes. Do you think that there's more of a polarity between the view of women in politics than there used to be in the 70s? I mean, you said that it was just people to people getting into the Senate and working. Is there more of a polarity between men and women when they're working together now in politics? Yes, Mary Sue?
Well, I still think there continues to be a polarity, although I'm just thoroughly enjoying listening to these three folks and your questions. This is wonderful. Yeah, there's still subtle perceptions. No one today, it's not socially acceptable to say that you discriminate or you feel differently about African Americans or women. It's not socially acceptable. But that's not to say either at a conscious or unconscious level that doesn't continue to be the case. But when I came to the General Assembly in 1977, I was the first woman who worked outside the home to make a living in the House. They were lovely, lovely women. And Elise Hines was a lawyer and a great friend, but I'm not sure she had an active practice. When I was able to get on the Courts of Justice Committee back then, and I went to take my seat, and in those days, I hope we have more political parity in Virginia here coming up. In those days, the majority party was on either side of the podium, and then the minority party was at the end. Well, I was so pleased to be on Courts of Justice that I went early to find my seat, and I looked and I looked and I couldn't find it. And I was placed over on the end, beyond both the majority party and the minority party. And I thought to myself, can I sit here for the next 2 months without suffering from a little passive aggressiveness? And I knew I couldn't. So I went upstairs to Dickie Cranwell. I told him the situation, and he said, "Don't worry, Mary Sue." He said, "Don't come down till I send for you." And so when the committee convened, he acted like, "Oh, Mr. Chairman, somebody, there's a little." So anyway, and then he sent up for me, and I went downstairs, and no one ever knew how that was corrected. When I first took the oath of office as Attorney General, and there's some time between the election day and inauguration, I had to strike out his and put her. The second time I was elected, I sent the oath back for them to fix. I mean, I can cite situation after situation after situation of problems. The Washington Post, if you want to go back and do a little history, the Washington Post did a major piece on sexism in the General Assembly when I was there. And it was terrible. It was terrible. At the same time, but you didn't talk about it. You didn't talk about it. I made what I thought was an off-the-record statement that ended up in the Post about what it was like to work. And anyway, I went over to the Senate side with my bills, and the subcommittee chairman put them down, and they were all dead. They were deader than 4 o'clock. When we'd show up before committees with their bills, we were always last. We were always last. But things aren't that way now. And, there's always a time for people to make adjustments. And I loved those guys and the women back then. But today, we still have problems. And I'll give you an example, and this involves a newspaper. First of all, let me say, next to California and New York, Virginia has more media markets than any state in the nation. It makes it enormously expensive for us. New York has the New York Times. That has an homogenizing effect on the whole state. Boston has the Boston Globe. We are balkanized in Virginia, and folks take advantage of that. Politicians take advantage of that. Plus, you have all these small, struggling newspapers. If we had one newspaper in this state, and we were the type of state that could, was geographically equipped for that, what a different state we would have. North Virginia's paper is the Washington Post. So, but right now I'm losing my original point.
Let me guide you to the history of Virginia here.
Yeah.
Do you think that influenced the way women are seen in the Senate now and in politics?
Well, I mean, I think
the traditions inherent.
I want to go back to a question you raised, and that has to do with the press. If I could wave a magic wand, I would wish that Larry Sabato would get a grant. And he or someone at the University of Virginia got a Pew Grant years ago. Hi, Governor. Got a Pew Grant years ago to look at campaigns. I wish they would get a grant and bring in the room the press corps, editorial writers, political writers, and have a dialogue about what still remains as biases and unconscious assumptions by the press. I'll give you one example, and this is the last thing I'll say. The farm
Hopefully
team,
not.
The farm team supported a candidate in Roanoke. This is a person who had been appointed by Governor Warner to be on the Radford board. She solicited the largest gift ever in the history of Radford University, which created the Nursing Center. She was a businesswoman for over 20 years. She was involved in every civic activity you could think of in Roanoke. And but she'd had a messy divorce. She came, and there were a lot of rumors, but she came out. She paid all her bills. She paid all her husband's bills. She was running for the House of Delegates. And this, you're talking about what they say we should run: a businesswoman, civic activist, been on big boards. Her first question when she went into the Roanoke Times for the editorial interview, they had read a bottom-feeding blog that morning. Her first question was, what about your finances? Her second question had to do with her children. You know, one child had been in trouble. When I had an extensive conversation with the editorial board, and of course they endorsed her opponent, who was against rail, who was Roanoke Times is a progressive newspaper. It's a wonderful newspaper. It's one of the most progressive in Virginia. But when it came to this candidate, this woman, they endorsed a candidate that was everything that they editorialized against. And when I called the editorial right away after the election, and I'm not saying it would have made a difference, he said, well, if a woman can't handle, if she can't handle her finances, how can she be expected to handle the state's finances? What is a classic stereotype for women? Finances. Doug Wilder knew that was also a stereotype for African Americans, and when he became governor, who was one of the most adept financial managers. He knew he needed to prove himself on finances. But here, this editorial writer, who's the head of the board, with a woman publisher, if she can't handle her finances, how can she be expected? You know, now that we can't deal with that. We can't deal with that. And the only way that type of thing's going to be addressed, Larry, wherever you are, is for somebody to pull in and pull together a grant, and let's start having conversations about these issues.
Air it. Yes, get it out.
One more thing.
Yes, Judy.
I'd be remiss if I failed to mention one thing. John Hager is here, and he's chairman of the Sorensen board. And the Sorensen Institute is at U.Va. Are you all familiar with it? Good. Support it. They do great work. Congratulations.